Secret of the Mimic is the latest Five Nights at Freddy's game from Will Studios. The game comes out in less than 2 months. A lot of people are really excited to see the new characters in action. Dolly, Mushroom, Maestro Man, Tiger, the Mimic itself, and most of all, Jackie. Jackie is a new Jack-in-the-Box style animatronic and has been heavily advertised to be a huge antagonist. She is also heavily implied to be the Mimic itself. This has caused a debate if Jackie is or isn't the Mimic. There are many strong arguments for both cases. I'll be going over both sides of the argument and tell you my thoughts after. Here's some evidence suggesting that Jackie is the Mimic. First of all, she's being marketed to be the Mimic and has a major role. She's on the key art for the game, more on that later. She's also the focus, character-wise, of PAX West 2024, well, besides the 10-year anniversary of Five Nights at Freddy's. She has a replica there, and her section of the game is the demo for Secret of the Mimic. With this much focus on her, she must be the costume the Mimic is wearing for the game. Speaking of the key art, she has the Mimic swirly eyes that is shown inside the Mushroom mascot costume, signifying that Mimic is using them as a suit or has control. She also has a similar voice progression and filter to Mimic at the end of Ruin. People also say that the Mimic can't fit inside of Jackie, and I see why, mainly because of her arms. The handy unit literally says this in the trailer.
It's a kind of prototype endoskeleton that can adapt to any costume and become any character.
That's the majority of the evidence that suggests Jackie is the Mimic. Now let's look at the other side of the spectrum. I kind of addressed some of this evidence in my breakdown of the Steam page, but I'll just repeat some of it here. In all of Jackie's footage, she has glowing eyes, unlike the swirly Mimic eyes. And Jackie doesn't have any legs, yet the Mimic does, as shown with Mushroom and the elephant, and possibly Dolly, but that's another topic for another day. In descriptions of the demo, there's a clock in the manager's office that Mailbot is in, and it takes place at 11 AM, so Jackie's part is most likely a tutorial for the game, similar to the utility tunnels in Security Breach. During her chase, shown in the trailer and Steam page, Jackie has her dirty appearance, just like in the trailers as well. At the end of the demo, Jackie is ruined and we see some of her endo, and her nose is missing and her hair is a mess. Again, from descriptions of the demo, it is heavily implied to not be the Mimic that is her endo. So here are my thoughts on the situation. I think that Jackie is, but also isn't the Mimic. Let me explain. I think that at first, Jackie will only be the Mimic when programming during her tutorial. We know that the Mimic likes a costume no matter the position, so they could also use Jackie as a suit later on in the game. But Jackie could still appear after her tutorial without the Mimic. Just having the Mimic one programming inside of her, she's still going after us. So that's my thoughts on Jackie's identity. I want to hear yours. Make sure to like and subscribe for more videos, and leave a comment telling me what you think about my theory. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon. Also, make sure to pre-order the game when it releases on June 13th. The daycare attendant is one of the most divisive characters in Five Nights at Freddy's. If you've been following me for a while or know me in real life, you know I'm the self-proclaimed #1 daycare attendant fan. They were introduced back in Security Breach, gained a large fan base, and spawned fan art, AUs, merchandise, and a few haters. They later appeared again in the Ruin DLC's second chapter with new forms, and a new daycare attendant, Eclipse. More on them later. Then they returned once again in Help Wanted 2, where returning to their pre-ruined states and giving us yet another daycare attendant, Jacka Moon. Now, with Secret of the Mimic on the horizon, I think they will return in this new game. Biases aside, it makes sense for the lore. Secret of the Mimic has a connection with Fall Fest. Posters of the celebration were put throughout PAX. The daycare attendant is also heavily implied to be originally from Fall Fest, where a few of Edwin's creations also are implied to reside, i.e. Dolly, since she is heavily speculated to be the carnival nurse from Help Wanted 2. A Moondrop candy can be found in Curse of Dreadbear. Jacka Moon is also tied to a Fall Fest, being Halloween themed. A poster for the carousel from Help Wanted 2 is in the game room at PAX. And who appears in the carousel level? Moon. This leads to my next point. If Edwin made the carousel, which it is heavily implied to be since it is on the cameras and at Fall Fest, then that means... Now, we do know that the daycare attendants were not made for the daycare. Back in Bobby Dots Part 1, I think I remember, they were revealed to have been originally stage performers until they were reprogrammed for the daycare. And since they were made before the daycare, then it's safe to assume that they were made before the PIZZAPLEX. Now let's take Ruined Eclipse. Oh, isn't he so cool? Look at him. Okay, now let's skin him. Take a look at the endo. It's very similar to the Mimic. Look at the teeth, also very similar to the Mimics. Their endo structure is also similar, mainly the bridge of the nose/upper lip and eyebrows. I also want to touch up on Ruined Eclipse's glowing forearms. They have coils inside them that seem to be the source of their glow. Now let's look at the Mimic's new design. His eyes are coils that glow. Now a lot of this is speculation with some proof, but let's actually look inside of the game, Secret of the Mimic. In Secret of the Mimic's main menu, on the floor, there is allegedly a Sun and Moon mural. It is described as the Sun and Moon Funko Pop face. On the outside of Murray's costume manor in the Help Wanted 2 update, just above the Bonnie and the Fredbear, a sun and a moon illustration are on each side. There is also an unused version of the Murray mural in the files for Help Wanted 2, although it has been confirmed that that is not the same mural as in the Secret of the Mimic main menu. Now let's look at some miscellaneous evidence. First off, Eclipse's animatronic comes back in PAX West 2024, even though Circus Baby did as well, but Eclipse's was specifically in the same room as a Jackie and the cameras near the VR booth where you can play test the Secret of the Mimic demo, which feels as if it implies that Sun and Moon will be making their appearance in the game. The daycare attendant also fits the circus vibes of most of Murray's creations inside of the factory. There are many clown animatronics, including Jackie, and Sun and Moon are a jester of sorts. Now let's look at which version of the daycare attendants will appear. First off, I don't think it will be Jacka Moon. I'm sorry. Even though they have the most connections to Fall Fest, I don't think that they'll appear. I think it will most likely be Eclipse though. Since in Ruin, they imply that Eclipse was the main daycare attendant. Once Sun and Moon are rebooted, they transform back into Eclipse. Again, implying that Eclipse was before them. So basically, in conclusion, Sun and Moon have a very high chance of appearing in the next game, especially with their speculated origins with Edwin. Those are my thoughts, and I want to hear yours. Do you think that the daycare attendants will make an appearance in Secret of the Mimic? If so, which one? I want to hear your thoughts on my theory in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to pre-order Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic before it releases on June 13th, 2025, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye! On May 5th, Steel Studios shared an in-game poster for Secret of the Mimic in celebration of their Mimic Mondays. It features a man with bandages on his hand and text warning employees to watch their hands. This had people thinking, what's up with all the hand imagery? And I decided to put in my 2 cents. The player will likely lose their hand sometime in Secret of the Mimic. Side tangent, if they do lose their hand, I think that would make VR mode a lot more challenging and fun, where you only have to play with one hand. But another tangent, this could all be a red herring, similar to how a lot of people thought that Mommy Longlegs from Poppy Playtime Chapter 2 was going to get burned at the end of the chapter because of a couple of posters. First off, you could say that they are just employee posters warning of danger and explaining the rules. Like the one with the girl with half of her hair removed as a warning, possibly referencing Lucia from the Tales from the PIZZAPLEX epilogues. But it's the excessive amount of hand imagery in the promotion for Secret of the Mimic that has caught my eye. At PAX, a lot of posters were revealed. Among those was a warning of exposed wiring showing a hand getting shocked. Another poster showed a new character, which I have dubbed NeedAHand. It's this hippie octopus thing. Again, pushing the themes of hands. But let's take a step outside of the VR booth. At PAX West, there was a replica of the facade used for the Five Nights at Freddy's movie, and blocking the door was a severed hand. Another thing I noticed is that during the Guess the Sketch era that Steel had back in 2023, some of them had significance. One of them was the Jack in the Box mascot, which I guess was supposed to hint towards Jackie, and another one of a Resident Evil key, which looks a lot like one of the fancy keys in the new Data Diver poster that we got. One of the Guess the Sketches was Combat Carl from Toy Story Terror. One of his most defining features is that he doesn't have a hand, and since we know that some of these are meant to be foreshadowing, this could also be used as evidence. All this to allude that something will happen to the player's hand, or hands. The poster from earlier for Mimic Mondays also mentions their hand being replaced. But before we get into that, how will the player lose their hand? I think that near the end, when the Mimic is revealed and possibly contained, depending on how this game will end, that the Mimic will rip off the player's hand. I know it sounds pretty gruesome, but the game was rated T for teen for violence. Not fantasy violence, but straight up violence. The only other game to get this was Into the Pit back in August of 2024. And that game had actual corpses in it, kind of like what we're seeing in Secret of the Mimic, with a corpse being stuffed inside one of the elephant costumes and possibly inside of Tiger Rock. But I really like this other theory by creator Vomited Thoughts. You may know them as the creator of the real-life Mimic animatronic that went viral a couple months ago. Again, I really like their theory on this, that Dolly will amputate the hand, or bite it off, as they say in their tweet. Also, yeah, Dolly mentioned for the 3rd time in these videos. Yeah, I just heard all 3 of Dolly's fans clap. You know who you are. This would actually play into the nurse gimmick that Dolly has, since, you know, she is a nurse and is speculated to be the carnival nurse from Help Wanted 2. I mentioned that last video as well. But if Dolly ends up being an ally, which she probably won't the way that she's walking towards the player in the trailer, if Dolly does end up being an ally, I think that she will replace our hand with some sort of prosthetic. In the Mimic Mondays poster, it does say that limbs are replaced at employees' expense. So that could probably mean like a reduction from your paycheck. I don't know, I'm unemployed. But again, replaced. So I think that Dolly will most likely, if she ends up being an ally, replace the player's hand with a prosthetic, so you don't walk around the whole game bleeding out of what used to be your hand. And yet again, she has shown experience with amputation and prosthetics in the first aid levels for Help Wanted 2, if the theory of her being the carnival nurse ends up being true. So, in conclusion, I theorize that the player will lose their hand sometime in Secret of the Mimic, either by Dolly or the Mimic itself. Those are my thoughts, and I want to hear yours. Make sure to like and subscribe, and tell me what you think in the comments. Do you think the player will lose their hand, and if so, by who? Make sure to pre-order Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic before it releases on June 13th, and I will see you guys later. Bye-bye. In the Curse of Dreadbear DLC, we are introduced to this new event called Fall Fest, and during Curse of Dreadbear, we are at Fall Fest 83. The event returns once again in Help Wanted 2, with multiple levels taking place there, such as Phaser Blast and the Cinder Carousel. The Fall Fest poster is also a collectible item in Help Wanted 2, with the date being in 1970, the earliest date that we have. And now with the next game, Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic, right around the corner, with its connections to Fall Fest, I have created a theory on how this game will end. So, in one of my previous videos about the daycare attendant and how I think that they will appear in Secret of the Mimic, which you should watch by the way if you haven't, was already a connection to Fall Fest, with posters of the carousel and posters of Fall Fest in the VR booth for Secret of the Mimic's demo. And also the overall carnival theme, especially with Jackie, a Jack-in-the-Box animatronic, who is also a clown, and Dolly, who I've stated multiple times, I believe, is the carnival nurse. Now, what does all this have to do with Secret of the Mimic's ending, or how I think it will end? First off, a lot like my NeedAHand theory, which again, you should totally go watch, there's a bunch of imagery in the newer teasers that we've been getting for Mimic Mondays and MCM Archive Fridays. First off, in the announcement trailer for Secret of the Mimic, released near Five Nights at Freddy's 10-year anniversary and the latest MCM Archive episode, a film reel is used at the end to introduce the title. Now, in the Secret of the Mimic trailer, it's normal, but in the announcement trailer and in MCM Archives 2, it's burning away. Now, with Fall Fest, we know that Fall Fest had some horrific fire sometime in its history, either around, I want to say 79 for this theory, because that is the year that Secret of the Mimic takes place. In Help Wanted 2, to get the Freddy memory plushie, you'll have to shoot down the rockets in the 3 previous levels. Throughout the levels, that will shoot down a hay barrel, some oil, and in FNAF 2 Phaser Blast, it will create a spark that burns down the Phaser Blast area. And also in the Cinder Carousel with Jacko Moon, the carousel is on fire. Again, alluding to a fire happening sometime in Fall Fest's history. In the Tales from the PIZZAPLEX epilogues, the Mimic's head is described to be differently colored than his body being the one that's discolored, like it had survived some sort of fire. That is how they describe it. Like it had survived some form of fire. But wait, doesn't the entirety of Secret of the Mimic take place inside of Murray's costume manor? Well, in the trailer, there's a scene with the player on top of the roof. So, I think that we will be able to leave the costume manor in some way, shape, or form, especially after Maestro Man destroys part of the ceiling. I also do think that the ending is going to involve the tiger costume in some way, but I am not all too sure or all too confident in that theory. So let me set the scene. It's the end of the game, the Mimic's design has been revealed, and FNAF is there, and the Mimic catches on fire. That sounds really cool, but also just sounds like they're overusing hype moments and aura. But with all the hints that Secret of the Mimic is connected to FNAF, the FNAF fire, and the Mimic's discoloration in the epilogues, it's pretty safe to say that the Mimic will get burned at the end. Now, will we retrieve the Mimic? Most likely. It wouldn't make sense for them to make an entirely new game if the player doesn't retrieve the Mimic. So, to sum it all up, I think that Secret of the Mimic will end, or at least have an ending, with the FNAF fire that has been alluded to throughout the Steelwool games, because of all the fire imagery connected with FNAF and FNAF's connection with Secret of the Mimic. But those are my thoughts, and I want to hear yours. How do you think Secret of the Mimic will end? Tell me in the comments down below, and make sure to pre-order Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic before it releases on June 13th. Have an awesome rest of your day, and I will see you guys soon. See ya!